Mile markers, a roadside confession. I didn't leave to get away from her. I left because the highway promised a sentence that didn't end on a question mark. We bought the van in a season when love still sounded like planning. It was a silver thing with dents already in the right places, a bed that folded into a table, and a small stovetop that tried very hard to be brave. Claire picked the curtains. Sunflowers loud enough to make early mornings feel less like an apology, and I installed a small brass bell in the doorway. For luck, she said. We said we would drive west until the map thinned, and then keep going until we ran out of reasons to turn around. We never made it to the Pacific together. The first miles didn't seem like beginnings. They felt like a door we forgot to close. The turnpike shouldered us out of the city, past the warehouses that know more about departures than any poet, past the exit where the airport coughs its metal birds into the air. We kept the radio low. It was October, and from the van's short vantage point, the world looked like someone had set it on fire and walked away. I learned the rhythm of the road the way you learn to breathe in a different altitude. Claire always wanted the window down one notch more than I liked. I kept the coffee in the thermos 2 degrees hotter than she did. She chose albums that started slow and arrived somewhere you didn't expect. I knew where every squeak lived. Above the rear wheel on bridges, in the dash when the air turned dry, in her voice whenever I said later to a small request she had already learned to stop repeating. We were 3 states out when the first wrong note arrived, and I mean that literally. Claire had a habit of tucking receipts and postcards into the travel journal we kept in the glove box. In Amarillo, at a diner that believed in butter like a religion, she wrote "Best Pie" with a smiley face and a coffee stain shaped like Wyoming. In Santa Rosa, she wrote "Green Chili's Heaven." In Gallup, in a gas station we both agreed was a crime scene with snacks, I reached for the journal to record "Never Again," and a paper slipped out, a folded receipt from a motel 2 hours behind us, dated 3 weeks earlier. My name misspelled, but on it anyway. I stood there with the pump in my hand and the desert pretending it had never heard of rain, and the PA system telling someone named Rick they had a package at the front, and I did not feel anything at first. Then I felt everything. The kind of everything that sits neatly in the corners of your eyes and refuses to fall. When I climbed back into the van, I looked at Claire's hands on the wheel, at the place where her wedding ring had left a faint indentation because she'd taken it off to put sunscreen on the day before. The ring was back on. The indentation had been a weather report, and I had not understood it. "Long line," she said, even though she knew I could see the empty register through the window. She preferred easy lies. We all do, until they stop working. I didn't ask. You'd think I would. But we had a rule we never said aloud. No fights in motion. The van could take a lot, but not that. The asphalt wrote its long, flat poem under us, and I kept the receipt in my pocket like a stone you don't show anybody in case it turns out not to be yours. We slept that night at a rest area frequented by truckers who believed in badminton, judging by the net someone had rigged between 2 mesquite trees. Claire fell asleep fast, as she always did when we were parked near other people. I lay awake and listened to vehicles pull in and leave. Voices you only ever hear once in your life, passing within feet of your face. At 3, the rain that New Mexico had forgotten arrived in sheets, and the badminton net gave up its usefulness and became weather. I waited until dawn because some conversations require the gentle violence of first light. "Who is he?" I asked, the words almost polite. She sat up slowly, as if waking from a script. She tilted her head and listened to the rain like a doctor. She stared at the curtains she chose, then at the bell. She touched it, and the smallest sound told the truth before she did. "His name is Aaron," she said. "From work. It wasn't supposed to. I don't know how to talk about this without ruining everything." "Everything is already ruined," I said, which was the nearest thing to wisdom that morning aloud. She looked not guilty so much as tired of being someone's good idea. "I thought this trip would fix it," she said, "or make it obvious. I kept thinking I would stop. I kept thinking I would tell you. Then I kept thinking maybe I wouldn't have to decide. There are moments you can see the exit ramp to a different life and still speed past it because your hands remember a steering wheel the way an old song remembers your voice. I could have left her there, rain and rest area, curtains and bell, middle of a state that knows how to keep secrets. I didn't. I turned off the fan so I could hear the rain better. When you don't know what to do, improve the sound. We're already far, I said. Let's go farther, not to fix anything, just to see if the road can hold what we are. It wasn't forgiveness, it was logistics. We drove west into a weather that believed in drama. Somewhere after Holbrook, a canyon opened, like a held breath finally exhaled. On the radio, a man sang about wanting more than he had any right to want, and Claire laughed at something a billboard promised, and then didn't speak for an hour. I counted mile markers as if they were prayers I didn't know the words to. At a viewpoint, we bought turquoise earrings from a woman whose hands had the smooth brutality of work. Claire bought 2-1 for a friend, she said. I didn't ask which one. At night, we pulled into a campground outside a town built to be a postcard. Red rocks performing for the sun, a main street where even the dust posed. Our site was at the edge, nearest to a fence that demarcated the public land from the private, and did nothing to convince the wind it should obey. The couple next to us argued about propane with the kind of love that survives all kinds of weather. A child somewhere laughed like he had just invented something important. Claire made pasta and did not oversalt it. I made a fire and burned it down to coals on purpose, because small heat is better than big heat when you need it to last. Why him? I asked finally, watching the flames negotiate with the air. He listened like I was a place he wanted to live, she said. Sometimes I didn't even like him. I just liked not having to explain why I was sad. Were you unhappy with me? I asked, like a person who had not been there. I was unhappy with me, she said. You were there. That's the cruel part. We went to sleep with the fire pretending to be a galaxy we could own. At 4, coyotes rehearsed a chorus, nobody applauds and everybody feels. At 6, the sun arrived with its usual lack of patience. Claire's shoulder touched mine. I didn't move away. The body betrays you last, and then it remembers what team it's on. We kept driving. The road taught me strange liturgies. You learn the holy hours of truck stops. You learn which small towns hate you immediately and which adopt you until dawn. You learn that the farther you go, the more the sky acts as if your problems are a regional issue and the atmosphere has other things to do. You learn that apologies are better exchanged in motion and plans are better planted when the engine is off. You learn how many different kinds of blue the world allows in a single afternoon. In Zion, we hiked a trail that asked for our attention without begging. Claire walked ahead, the small pack on her back moving like the second heartbeat I used to claim. At a bend, she stopped to watch 2 climbers spider their way up a face that had no interest in kindness. Do you think they love each other? She asked me, pointing at the rope between them. They trust each other, I said. That's something. At the top, a man in a hat with too many pins said, Peace, travelers, and gave us slices of apple that tasted like his childhood. We chewed and looked out at a geography that had learned to say yes to wind and no to the softening influence of water. Claire squeezed my fingers. Habit or intention, I couldn't tell. On the way down, she told me a story about a teacher who had taught her how to read poetry out loud without breaking it. I told her about the time my father had driven all night to make it to my freshman soccer game and fell asleep 10 minutes in, and that was the only time I had loved him more. In a motel outside St. George, the clerk gave us a key that did not open the door it promised, and then laughed with genuine sorrow. He gave us another room with a working air conditioner that sounded like a tractor. We showered separately, and then together because life is rarely tidy. Claire cried with her forehead against the tile. I cried in a way my body understood more honestly than my mouth. I kept waiting for someone to tell me what to do next. The highway did not care. That was the gift. Near Baker, California, we stopped at the world's tallest thermometer because a sign commanded respect. It lied about the heat, as all monuments do, and we took a photo with our smiles arranged by the same interior designer who had furnished our wedding album. In Mojave, wind farms tilted at nothing and succeeded anyway. At the edge of the desert, the van stuttered like a man reconsidering his choice of words. We limped into a town with a mechanic who saw our desperation and priced it accordingly. We gave him the money anyway, because I did not want our marriage to end in a service bay surrounded by posters of women smiling about lubricants. Where are you headed? He asked while a teenager who might have been his grandson disappeared under the van and talked to it in a dialect of wrench. West, Claire said. West of what? He said, and then laughed like he didn't mean to be cruel. We slept that night at a pullout where the ocean finally decided to show up and explain itself. Waves should have been a relief. Instead, they were an argument I couldn't win. Claire walked the beach with her shoes in her hand, letting the water pretend to catch her bad ankle and then letting it go. I sat and watched a fisherman throw his line into a world that owed him nothing and then give him something anyway. 2 days later, we reached the town where Claire's friend lived, the one she wrote the postcard to and never sent. It perched on the shoulder of the coast like it mistrusted rain. Houses clung to hillsides that had given way before and would again. The friend's place had a porch that forgave strangers. We drank coffee that tasted like a favor, and the friend used graduate-level listening. At one point, she put her hand over Claire's and prayed without closing her eyes. I looked away and counted gulls to prove I had not died. That was where I told Claire I needed to stop pretending we were on a trip and admit we were on a road to an ending. I'll take the van south, then east, I said. You can fly home, or stay, or go north. You don't need me to narrate your choices. I'm sorry, she said, and there was a way to read the sentence that made it look like a period and one that made it look like the introduction to a longer speech. I didn't want to be the kind of person who breaks things, she said. I wanted to be the kind who fixes them. You are, I said, just not this. We went to the airport the next morning. We stood in front of the departures board like it knew our names. We hugged the way people do at gates, full-bodied, public, without the privacy tragedy prefers. She kissed my cheek as if revising a draft. You were home, she said. The tense mattered. Then she walked away with a backpack that had more miles in it than I had noticed. I drove south with the ocean to my right and a silence in the van that felt less like loss and more like a truth finally spoken. In San Clemente, a man in a parking lot asked if I wanted to buy a surfboard and then admitted it wasn't his. In San Diego, I parked near a beach where the dogs believed in reincarnation. I slept in a campground where 2 retired school teachers played cards by headlamp and argued about rules they had invented that afternoon. In the morning, I turned east. The bell in the doorway rang when I hit potholes. Each time it did, I felt less haunted by the sound. The desert received me like a confession. I did not forgive Claire. I did not forgive myself. I did something quieter. I kept going. There is a stretch of I-8 where the earth looks like it has been deliberately broken into beautiful pieces. The van developed a new noise and then decided to make it only occasionally, so I decided not to worry. At a gas station in Yuma, the attendant asked if I wanted a car wash, and I said no because I wanted the dirt to tell the right story when I got wherever I was going. In Arizona, the sky turned a color I don't know the name for, and somewhere past Gila Bend, a sedan pulled onto the shoulder, with its hazards making small orange prayers. I stopped because that is what you do when you are no longer the version of yourself who thinks he has somewhere more important to be. The car's driver was a woman my mother's age with a teenager, already imagining a different life in the passenger seat, and a little boy in the back with a juice box he treated like a religion. The problem was not dramatic, a belt slipping, a reservoir complaining, heat where heat should not be. I had tools and a small competence. We let the engine cool, and the boy showed me a dinosaur he'd drawn in a notebook full of other things he believed in. We were trying to make Tucson before dark, the mother said. I wanted to say me too, even though no part of me belonged to Tucson. We stitched the problem to a point where the car would allow a slow migration. A state trooper stopped long enough to perform a ritual and then left with the dignity of a man who had decided not to write a ticket to sadness. I followed them into town to make sure they made it. When they did, the mother bought me a burrito you could use for weight training and pressed a crumpled 5 into my palm as if tip culture applied when the world remembered to be kind. I refused the 5. I ate the burrito and tasted the first uncomplicated thing in days. In the eastbound miles after that, I started pulling off more often. Once for a sign that said world's largest pistachio and delivered exactly that. Once for a museum in a town that had only enough history to deserve a room and made one anyway. Once because a hawk traced the median like it had questions for me, and I wanted to offer it a better angle. I made coffee at dawn in a rest area where a couple argued softly in Spanish about a cousin who would or would not repay a debt, and the argument sounded like love. Somewhere in New Mexico, the van decided it had had enough of being brave. The check engine light flickered and then committed to its position. I coaxed us into a small town that sold itself as a place where the atomic age had knocked once and left its phone number. A mechanic named Luce told me the problem in terms my patience understood, then patted the van's flank like it had done its best. The part would arrive in 3 days. The motel would be on the edge of affordable. The diner would serve coffee that tasted like it remembered better years. I stayed. What else do you do when a thing you rely on asks for mercy? In those 3 days, time stretched out like a cat that trusted me. I helped an old man move boxes from a back room to a truck that had known other jobs. I carried a ladder for a woman who wanted to hang prayer flags that had already forgotten their prayers. I learned that in this town, the grocery clerk was a philosopher and the librarian was a boxer on weekends. I went to a Wednesday night AA meeting, even though I am not an alcoholic, because the sign said all are welcome, and I wanted to know if they meant me. A man named Earl said, "Hi, I'm Earl, and I am here because I don't want to lie to myself anymore." And everyone said, "Hi, Earl," like their mouths had been expecting him for years. A woman named June said she keeps a list of things she can fix and things she can't, and each morning she checks to make sure she hasn't accidentally moved anything from one list to the other. On the second day, I got a text from Claire. "Landed. Home is loud. I hope you're safe." I didn't reply immediately, not out of cruelty, but because I wanted to answer the right person myself first. When I did reply, I wrote, "I'm okay. The van's learning boundaries. So am I." She sent back a heart she had not used in months. I stared at it until it turned into a shape that meant nothing and then meant something again. When the part arrived, Luce installed it with the kind of competence that makes you want to marry competence. She charged me less than she should have and gave me a bag of roasted chilies that my van would smell like for days. I left town slower than I arrived, not because the van asked it of me, but because my body had learned a new gear. Outside of Abilene, rain flirted with being weather and then remembered itself. The sky unzipped. The wipers complained about their job and did it anyway. The road filled with other people's plans trying to find their lanes. I saw the hazard lights before I understood what they belonged to. A pickup sideways against the guardrail, a small trailer tipped like a paused sentence. A man standing in the median with his hands open to the air. I pulled over and ran because there are moments you don't ask permission from your past. The trailer had held a horse. The horse was on her side, breathing with the insulted insistence of a thing that has always been upright. The man's face was a map without names. Other cars stopped, and strangers became a team. We learned each other's competencies in 4 sentences. Nurse, farmer, someone's father, me with a jack, and knowledge of leverage. The rain worked against us and then began to help because it has its moods too. We righted the trailer. We calmed the horse with lies that sounded like prayers. We made the world small enough, for a minute, to be kind. After, soaked through and shaking, I sat on the guardrail and watched as the state trooper tried to make paperwork make sense of a day that wouldn't. The farmer, his name was Cole, he had a father's hands. His daughter showed me a photo of the horse last summer when nothing was wrong, looked at me like I had put something back in him he would need later. "You from around here?" he asked. "I'm from the road," I said, which was true for longer than I expected. By the time I reached the state line, the storm had gone ahead to complicate someone else's evening. I turned the bell in the doorway so it wouldn't ring and thought about the ways we remind ourselves of what we can't control. I thought about June's list. I thought about the horse, upright now, chewing hay in a rescue barn, not because the world is fair, but because enough people decided to make it fair for an hour. When I pulled into my driveway 2 days later, the city made its usual argument for its own importance. The sycamore out front had dropped the kind of leaves that overwhelm plans. The apartment's windows looked in at themselves like they were practicing being honest. I backed the van into the spot we had measured twice and argued about once. The brass bell rang when I cut the engine. Inside, the air remembered us. On the kitchen counter, a plant Claire loved had decided to be dramatic in our absence. On the table lay the travel journal with its sunflower ribbon. I opened it and read aloud, alone, the entries we had written when we believed paper could hold what we were not brave enough to say to each other. I took out the motel receipt. I did not throw it away. I slid it into an envelope I labeled Evidence of Trying and put it with the tax documents and her old letters and a photograph of a dog neither of us owned anymore. Claire came by the next afternoon. She stood in the doorway with the same backpack and a haircut the airport had probably not complimented. She looked like she had slept in a place where someone else had used her name. We hugged in that elegant, awkward way that makes two people look like a four-armed question. We sat at the table. We did not talk about Aaron. We did not talk about the ocean the way people talk about a movie they saw separately and loved differently. We talked about rent and books and how the coffee shop had changed owners and bought a blender the neighborhood did not approve of. I'm going to stay with my sister for a while, she said. I need to be in a place where I'm not the only sound. I'm going to keep the van, I said. I need a thing that moves when I ask it to. We signed the papers that asked us to write down the history of our love in a few legally relevant sentences. Our friends took sides and then stopped because I refused to let them. We divided the bowls. She took the ones we bought on a day when the market smelled like peaches. I kept the ones that stacked better. I thought generosity would feel like hunger. It felt like sleep. There is a version of this story where I meet someone at a gas station who laughs at my jokes and knows how to fix a leaky faucet with nail polish, and we ride into a sunset that has already been rented by other people. That is not what happened. What happened is this. I drove again, not away. Not toward. I drove around. I took weekends and small weeks. I carried other people's couches upstairs that had forgotten to be kind. I learned to back the van into tight places without swearing. I wrote a list like June's and kept it taped inside the cupboard with the coffee. Fixable, spark plugs, apologies with proof, loose cabinet hinges, my habit of answering pain with silence. Not fixable, other people's promises, the weather, the past. I read the list like a prayer, which is to say I read it when I didn't believe it and more often when I did. In March, a man from the highway rescue asked if I wanted to train. You've got the look, he said. People trust you when you say you're okay, even when it's not true yet. I learned how to park the van behind a triangle of flares. I learned to speak the language of accident without pretending to be a hero. I learned to say I'm here in 12 different ways and mean it each time. I learned the weight of a stranger leaning on your shoulder while he decides whether to cry. I still think of Claire every time I pass a field of sunflowers that refuses to respect fences. I think of the bell when I hear a sound that means luck. I think of the receipt when I hold something I am not ready to drop. I do not pray for her happiness, I assume it. That's my act of faith. One evening in early summer, I pulled into a rest area in Kansas that had pretended to be a park flowers and a fake creek and a bronze statue of a pioneer who looked like he needed a better chiropractor. A choir of frogs practiced singing the same note with different intentions. A minivan arrived with a family that understood years in terms of school. The father walked 5 steps ahead, carrying too many bags. The mother moved at the pace of everyone's day. The teenage daughter stared at her phone like she had misplaced the name of a feeling. The little boy looked around as if he had been hired to notice things. He saw the bell in my doorway. "What's that?" he asked. "Luck," I said. "Does it work?" he asked because he is the correct kind of scientist. "Sometimes," I said, "but only if you ring it and then do all the other things that make luck unnecessary." He looked at me like I had said something that would make sense later, and then he rang the bell with the kind of seriousness I have been trying to bring to my life. It made the same small sound it made the day Claire hung it up. I lay in the van that night with the doors open to the kind of breeze that forgive mistakes. I fell asleep thinking of mile markers as beads on a string, each one I touched and let go. I dreamed I was driving across a map that did not end, not because I refused to stop, but because the road kept turning into the kind of home you carry with you when everything else has decided to stay behind. Here is the ending you asked for, the finished kind, the one you can set on a shelf and dust occasionally. I did not get back together with Claire. We returned each other gently, like books to a library we both still wanted to belong to. She married a man who, in pictures, looks like he remembers umbrellas. They have a dog that wears sweaters. I send a card at New Year's because I like rituals that belong to no one religion. I kept the van. I kept the bell. I kept the habit of stopping for hazard lights and horses in trouble, and strangers who look like they might not ask for help unless someone shows them how. I keep a list of roads I have not yet met and forgive myself for loving the ones I already know better. I wake early. I drink coffee that tastes like things taking their time. I keep an extra toothbrush because preparation is a love language. I hang my map and draw a thin line with a pencil between the places where I have been honest and the places where I plan to be. When people ask, I tell them I went looking for the Pacific and found the road instead. When they ask if I am lonely, I say sometimes, which is not the same thing as being alone. When they ask if I have forgiven Claire, I say forgiveness is a town you pass through on your way to somewhere you were supposed to be all along. You don't need to live there to know it exists. The van starts on the second try most mornings. The bell rings on potholes and beginnings. The highway writes the same sentence again and again, and if you let it, the sentence changes you. I drive, I stop. I help, I sleep. I wake up where the sun has decided to start, and let that be my first instruction. And when luck fails, as it often does, I do all the other things. If you made it to the end of the story, thank you. It means a lot. New stories like this one are posted every single day, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one. And if this story touched you, please give it a like. It really helps more people find our content.